The world was a nauseating carousel of shimmering lights and muffled sounds. Emma's head swam in a thick, syrupy fog, the cloying sweetness of wine still coating her tongue. Just one more glass, for our anniversary. Jason's voice, a serpent's whisper, echoed in the spinning vortex of her mind. He'd smiled, his eyes holding a gleam she had mistaken for affection. Now, she understood it was the glint of a hunter cornering its prey. She was lying on something impossibly soft, the fabric like cool water against her feverish skin sill. Her fingers clumsily traced the embroidered pattern of the duvet cover. A dim, ambient glow emanated from floor-to-ceiling windows, revealing a sprawling cityscape of glittering jewels, a panorama of a life she could only dream of. The opulence was suffocating. The air, thick with the scent of expensive lilac and something masculine sandalwood and citrus, felt alien. Panic, cold and sharp, began to cut through the drug-induced haze. Her party dress, a simple navy sheath Jason had picked out, felt constricting. A second skin she wanted to claw off. She tried to sit up, to push herself off the bed. Her limbs were anchors, dragging her down into the plush mattress. A wave of helplessness washed over her, hot and terrifying. This was a cage, gilded and beautiful, but a cage nonetheless. The soft click of a keycard sliding into the lock was like a gunshot in the silent room. Emma's breath hitched, her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird beating against its bars. The door swung inward, revealing the silhouette of a man against the bright hallway light. He was tall, his frame broad and imposing, filling the doorway as if he owned the very space he occupied. He took a staggering step inside, the door closing behind him with a heavy thud, sealing them in together. The scent of aged whiskey and the cold night air clung to him, a stark contrast to the room's sterile perfection. Fear, raw and primal, seized her. This was it. This was the man Jason had sold her to. Who are you? She slurred, the words thick and clumsy. She pushed against the mattress, a futile effort to create distance. The man squinted, his head tilting as if trying to solve a complex puzzle. He was drunk, but not sloppy. There was a dangerous edge to his intoxication, a cold power just beneath the surface. "This is my room," he stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated through the floor. It was a voice accustomed to command, even when slurred by alcohol. "No," she whispered, shaking her head, which only made the room spin faster. "No. Please get out." He moved toward the bed, not with aggression, but with a disoriented curiosity. He was close enough now that she could see the sharp lines of his jaw, darkened with late-night stubble, and the unnerving intensity in his deep-set eyes. Even clouded as they were, he was handsome in a way that felt like a threat. Emma felt a strange, betraying heat spread through her veins, a chemical reaction she couldn't control. The drug was a poison, twisting her fear into something horribly different. Her mind screamed no, a silent, desperate shriek, but her body had become a traitor, responding to a stimulus she couldn't comprehend. Her last conscious thought was of his shadow falling over her, the scent of whiskey and power overwhelming her senses as the darkness finally pulled her under completely. A blade of morning sun sliced through a gap in the heavy curtains, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Emma's head throbbed with a vicious, pounding rhythm. She groaned, a pain sound swallowed by the cavernous silence of the suite. The memories of the night were fractured, sharp-edged shards of a nightmare she couldn't piece together. The weight of a body, the scrape of a man's jaw against her cheek, a low voice murmuring something she couldn't recall. She sat bolt upright, clutching the silken sheet to her chest. The bed was empty. Her navy dress was folded neatly over a velvet armchair. She was wearing a man's stark white dress shirt, sleeves ridiculously long, a crisp cotton smelling faintly of him. Panic, cold and absolute, clawed its way up her throat. The click of a door opening made her flinch. He emerged from the adjoining bathroom, transformed. The drunken haze was gone, replaced by chilling sobriety. Dressed in dark trousers and a perfectly fitted shirt, he looked every inch the predator she'd sensed last night. His jaw was clean-shaven, his dark hair was damp, and his eyes a piercing Arctic blue were cold and clear. He looked at her not with remorse or concern, but with the faint, impersonal irritation of a man discovering an error in his schedule. "What happened?" Emma's voice was a ragged whisper. "Who are you?" Steve Chandler retrieved a platinum watch from the nightstand, fastening it around his wrist with an efficient snap. "I could ask you the same question," he said, his tone clipped and devoid of warmth. "You were in my suite." The accusation ignited a fire in her belly, burning through the shame. "Your suite? I was brought here. Someone, my husband, he drugged me." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. She watched his face for any sign of empathy, any flicker of human decency, and found none. She had to know. Swallowing her pride, she forced the question out. "Did we?" She couldn't finish, the humiliation, a physical weight in her chest. He didn't pretend to misunderstand. A curt, almost imperceptible nod was his only answer. "It appears so." Tears of shame and fury welled in her eyes. The one question that mattered most trembled on her lips. "Did you use any protection?" For the first time, he met her gaze directly. For a split second, something unreadable flickered in those icy depths: surprise, annoyance, before the mask of indifference slammed back into place. "That won't be an issue," he dismissed, waving a hand as if swatting away an insignificant fly. "It's not the possibility." "What do you mean, not a possibility?" she pressed, confusion overriding her fear. He stated it as a simple, unchangeable fact, like quoting a stock price. "I'm sterile. It was medically confirmed years ago. There is a 0% chance of pregnancy." The relief was so staggering it almost buckled her. But it was immediately chased by a fresh wave of disgust at his clinical detachment. He saw this not as a violation, but as a solved equation. He moved to his briefcase, retrieved a checkbook, and sat at the small desk. The scratch of a pen filled the tense silence. "This was a regrettable mistake," he said, his voice the epitome of corporate coldness. "On both our parts. This should compensate you for the inconvenience." He slid a freshly written check across the polished wood surface. Emma's eyes fell on the number. $10 million. Enough money to solve every problem she had, to ensure her comatose mother had the best care for the rest of her life. It was a king's ransom, and it was the most profound insult she ever received. "You think you can buy my silence?" Her voice, low and trembling with rage, made him look up. "You think this night, what you did, has a price tag?" "That I have a price tag," she stood, snatching the check from the table. The paper felt flimsy and foul in her hands. With a savage rip, she tore it in half, then again into quarters, the pieces fluttering down to the plush, cream-colored carpet like toxic confetti. His perfect composure finally cracked. A muscle twitched in his jaw, his eyes narrowed, a glint of shock and something else, something akin to grudging respect flashing within them. "No one refused Steve Chandler. Keep your money," she spat. She grabbed her dress from the chair and fled into the bathroom, slamming the door behind her. Her hands shook as she tore off his shirt and pulled on her own clothes. When she emerged, she marched toward the exit, her spine ramrod straight, her dignity the only armor she had left. Her hand was on the cold, brass doorknob when an inexplicable force made her pause. A strange, unnerving current still connected her to the man in the room, a shared moment of darkness, of confusion. It was a bizarre and unwelcome sensation, and she shoved it down, burying it deep. She twisted the handle, pulled the heavy door open, and walked out into the hallway without a single backward glance. leaving him standing alone in the sunlit silence. The tattered remains of his $10 million solution scattered at his feet. The sharp rap on the door was an assault on the fragile peace of Emma's morning. She opened it to find her world collapsing on the welcome mat. Jason stood there, his familiar face a mask of cold indifference. Beside him, clinging to his arm, was Penny, her smile a predatory slash of red lipstick. "Emma," Jason started, his tone devoid of the warmth it once held. "We need to talk." They didn't wait for an invitation. Pushing past her into the small, sunlit living room that suddenly felt cramped and suffocating, Penny's eyes, alight with triumphant malice, scanned the modest furniture, the framed photos of Emma and Jason in happier times. She wrinkled her nose as if smelling something unpleasant. "Still living in this little box? How quaint." Penny sneered, her voice dripping with condescension. She tossed a thick manila envelope onto the coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud. "Divorce papers, sign them." Emma stared at the envelope, then at the woman who had been her supposed friend. "Penny, what are you doing? Replacing you, darling," Penny said, running a possessive hand up Jason's chest. "It's what I've always wanted. You were just a convenient placeholder until Jason came to his senses. My family has money, connections. What do you have? A sick mother and a dead-end job." Each word was a calculated strike. Jason stood silent, his inaction a damning confirmation. The betrayal was so profound it left her breathless. He had used her quiet stability as a launchpad while he lined up his next, more profitable, venture. "Jason, why?" The question was a whisper, a plea for some semblance of the man she thought she had married. He finally met her gaze, his eyes hard and unapologetic. "It's just business, Emma. I need what her family can offer me. You can't give me that. It's time for me to upgrade." A sharp gasp came from the hallway. Emma's mother, frail and unsteady, stood clutching the doorframe, her face ashen. She had heard everything. "Mother," Emma cried, rushing to her side. Her mother's eyes, wide with shock and pain, locked onto Jason. She swayed, her hand flying to her chest. "How could you?" she wheezed, before her legs gave way. Emma caught her just before she hit the floor, her own strength failing. "Mum, stay with me. Somebody call an ambulance," she screamed, her voice cracking with terror. Jason and Penny watched, frozen for a moment in detached horror, before Jason pulled Penny toward the door. "This isn't our problem," he muttered, dragging his new fiancée out of the wreckage he'd created. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving Emma alone with the sound of her own frantic sobs and her mother's shallow, ragged breaths. 2 days later, Emma walked into her office like a ghost. The hospital vigil had etched dark circles under her eyes, and her mother's comatose state was a constant, crushing weight on her soul. But the bills were already mounting, a cruel and immediate reality she couldn't escape. She needed this job. The usual morning chatter died as she approached her desk. Conversations dropped to hushed whispers, and she could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her. The office grapevine had clearly been working overtime. They knew about the divorce. They knew Jason had left her, but the story they'd been fed was a twisted, venomous version of the truth. The elevator doors chimed, and the whispers turned to gasps. Penny strode in as if she owned the place, a massive diamond flashing on her left hand. She made a beeline for Emma's cubicle, her expression one of saccharine pity. "Emma, darling," she cooed, her voice loud enough for the entire floor to hear. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay. Jason was so worried about you. Even after finding out you'd been unfaithful." Emma's head snapped up. "What are you talking about?" Penny's eyes narrowed, a flicker of genuine venom showing through the facade. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Emma's neck. "That," she said, her voice dropping into a dramatic stage whisper. Jason told me all about your little secret. Who gave you that disgusting love bite, Emma? Who were you sleeping with behind my fiance's back? The entire office was now silent, openly staring. Mortified, Emma's hand flew to her neck, where a faint, purplish mark lingered, a mark she had desperately tried to conceal with makeup. It was the only tangible evidence of that hazy, drugged night with Steve Chandler. A night that had felt more like a fever dream. Her cheeks burned with a shame, so intense it felt like a physical blow. She had no defense, no explanation that wouldn't sound like a lie. The memory of the sterile hotel room, of the cold, powerful man who had claimed fathering a child was an impossibility for him, crashed into her, and with it, a wave of nausea so profound she had to grip her desk to stay upright. The dizziness that had plagued her since her mother's collapse wasn't just stress. The doctor at the hospital had insisted on running tests when she'd nearly fainted in the waiting room. The results were tucked in her purse, a piece of paper that defied all logic. 2 months pregnant. It was impossible. A cruel joke. Steve Chandler had been explicit, sterile. Yet the timeline was undeniable. The mark on her neck was the proof of their encounter, and the life growing inside her was its unbelievable consequence. Emma, my office, now her boss, Mr. Harrison, stood at the door of his glass-walled office, his face a grim mask. She walked the short distance in a daze, the stares of her colleagues like daggers in her back. She sat, her hands trembling in her lap. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. Emma, I'm aware of your situation, he began, steepling his fingers. He couldn't quite meet her eye. Penny's father is a major investor in this company. Jason is set to become a vice president at his new firm. These are important people. The implication hung heavy and suffocating in the air. What I'm saying is, he continued, his voice softening into a weak, paternal tone, it would be for the best if you didn't make things difficult. For Jason, for yourself, accept what's happened. Sometimes, it's better to cut your losses and move on quietly. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a threat. A warning to accept her fate as the discarded, unfaithful wife. To disappear, lest she become an inconvenience to Jason's ascent. She looked at her boss, a man she had respected, and saw only another person choosing power and money over decency. She was utterly, completely alone, standing on the edge of an abyss with a secret that could either save her or destroy her completely. The air in the private examination room was sterile, chilled to a clinical perfection. It did nothing to soothe the frantic tremor in Emma's hands. She sat on the edge of a plush leather chair, her knuckles white as she twisted a crumpled tissue. Opposite her, Steve Chandler was the picture of unnerving calm. His tailored suit a suit of armor, his expression an unreadable mask of corporate indifference. Every tick of the minimalist wall clock echoed the frantic beat of her heart. This was it. The moment that would either confirm her deepest fear or expose her as a liar. Let's be clear. Emma, Steve's voice was low, cutting through the silence with the precision of a scalpel. My medical history is not a matter of opinion. It is a catalogue of established facts. I cannot father a child. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze piercing. If this is some elaborate play for a larger settlement, I advise you to reconsider. Name your price now, and we can end this. But if that doctor walks through the door and confirms you fabricated this story, he let the threat hang in the air, its weight pressing down on her. Emma flinched, the accusation a fresh slap after the endless humiliation from Jason and Penny. I'm not lying, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't want your money. I need to know. She didn't know which truth was more terrifying, that she was pregnant with a stranger's child, or that she wasn't pregnant at all and was losing her mind. The door clicked open, and an older, kind-faced man in a white coat entered, holding a tablet. Dr. Evans. He offered a polite but reserved smile that gave nothing away. Ms. Evans, Mr. Chandler. We have the results. Steve's posture remained rigid. A king awaiting a verdict he already believed he knew. Emma held her breath, her entire world shrinking to the polished screen in the doctor's hands. Well, the initial test was correct. Dr. Evans began, his eyes flicking from Emma to Steve. Emma, you are approximately 6 weeks pregnant. Your hormone levels are strong. Everything looks perfectly healthy. A wave of dizziness washed over Emma. Pregnant, it was real. She pressed her hand to her stomach, a disbelieving, protective instinct already taking root. But before relief could settle, dread flooded back in. Steve's jaw tightened. And the paternity analysis? He demanded, his tone laced with ice. The one I insisted upon, Doctor. Evans looked at him, and for the first time, his professional demeanor wavered, replaced by a look of genuine wonder. Mr. Chandler, I've been practicing medicine for 30 years, and I've rarely seen anything like this. We ran the test twice to be certain. He paused, letting the gravity of his next words fill the room. The DNA is a 99.99% match. There is no question. You are the biological father. He looked between them, a sense of awe in his voice. Given your documented medical history, frankly, it's a miracle, a God-given miracle. The word miracle struck Steve Chandler like a physical blow. The mask of control shattered for a long, silent moment. He didn't move, didn't breathe. The sterile, predictable world he commanded, a world of assets and liabilities, of facts and figures, had just been fractured by the impossible. Father. The word echoed in the sudden, roaring silence of his mind. A word he had erased from his future decades ago. He stared at Emma, truly seeing her for the first time not as a complication or a potential extortionist, but as the vessel of an impossibility, the mother of his child, his heir. Without another word, he stood. The motion was stiff, mechanical, as if his body was relearning how to operate. His gaze, once cold and assessing, now held a bewildering mix of shock, disbelief, and a flicker of something else, something fiercely protective. He simply nodded once at the doctor, a silent dismissal, and then looked at Emma. Come with me, he said. The words no longer a command but a statement of fact. A new reality had begun. The drive to his villa was a silent blur. Emma watched the city's familiar, gritty landscape melt away, replaced by winding roads, lush greenery, and the imposing gates of a world she couldn't comprehend. The villa itself wasn't a house. It was a modern fortress of glass and stone perched on a cliffside, overlooking the distant, sparkling ocean. As the car pulled to a stop, an elegantly dressed older woman with warm eyes greeted them at the grand entrance. Welcome home, sir, she said to Steve, before turning her gentle smile to Emma. And welcome to you, Mrs. Chandler. I'm Mary, the head housekeeper. We're so pleased to have you, Mrs. Chandler. Emma's voice was a choked whisper. Her cheeks burned. She looked from Mary's kind face to Steve's impassive one. Oh, no, you don't understand. We're not. I'm just Emma. She felt impossibly small standing in the cavernous marble foyer. And I can't stay here. This is too much. Steve watched her, his expression unreadable. He'd seen women try to claw their way into his life for years, feigning humility. All their eyes calculated the value of the art on the walls. Emma's panic was different. It was genuine, raw, and utterly out of place. She looked like a lost sparrow in an eagle's nest. I don't want your money, she insisted, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. I appreciate you confirming everything, but I have a job. I can take care of myself. And my baby. You are fired, Steve stated, not unkindly. I'll find another job, she retorted, lifting her chin. My mother, her hospital bills, I have to work. Steve merely gave a subtle nod to Mary, who discreetly disappeared. He took a step closer to Emma, his presence commanding the space. Your mother's medical care has been transferred to the best facility in the country, effective immediately. All her expenses are covered. As for your job at the design firm, your termination has been rescinded. Consider it a clerical error. Emma stared at him, bewildered. How did you? She couldn't even form the question. He had dismantled her entire life's problems in a single sentence. It was terrifying. It was impossibly kind. Her pride warred with the overwhelming relief. She looked around the vast, museum-like living area, at the floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the endless sea. How do you even make so much money anyway? She asked, the question so guileless, so utterly devoid of cunning, that it caught him completely off guard. For the first time since he received the news, the rigid line of Steve Chandler's mouth softened. A slow, quiet smile so faint it was almost imperceptible touched his lips. In that moment, he saw her not as the source of a problem, but as the beginning of something he never knew he was missing. She was honest, proud, and completely oblivious to the world she had just stumbled into. And she was carrying his son, or his daughter, his miracle. The fluorescent lights of the Sterling Corp office hummed with an irritating buzz, a sound that drilled into Emma's exhausted mind. It was past 9. The city lights outside smeared into watercolor streaks by the rain lashing against the panoramic windows. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. But her supervisor, Miss Frank, had hovered over her desk with a stack of files at precisely 5 o'clock. Just a few urgent revisions. Emma, shouldn't take long. For hours later, Emma's vision blurred over the spreadsheet. Every cell felt like a cage. She knew this wasn't about work. It was about punishment. She'd seen Miss Frank taking a hushed, smiling phone call from Penny earlier in the day. This was just another turn of the screw. A sharp click of heels on the polished floor broke the silence. Emma didn't have to look up. The cawing scent of Chanel No. 5 announced Penny's arrival before she rounded the cubicle wall, dressed in a crimson dress that was a declaration of war. She leaned against the partition, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. Still here? Jason and I just had the most wonderful dinner at the Savoy, Penny said, examining her perfectly manicured nails. He feels so guilty about you, you know. He wanted to make sure you were settling into your new reality. Emma's fingers tightened on her mouse. What do you want, Penny? Penny's smile widened, a venomous, glittering thing. I want you to understand the new order of things. This job, it's temporary. Your little apartment, also temporary. I'm not just taking your husband, Emma. I'm erasing you from this city. You're a ghost already. You just haven't realized it yet. Her eyes, cold and calculating, held Emma's gaze. Jason is weak. He might have left a few breadcrumbs for you out of pity. I'm here to sweep them up. A cold dread, sharp and acidic, clawed its way up Emma's throat. This was more than just petty jealousy. This was annihilation. You won't get away with this. Penny laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Oh, darling, I already have. She took a deliberate step closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You know, I was thinking about loose ends. Things that might keep you anchored here. Your mother, for instance. All alone in that expensive room at Highland Hospital. Emma's heart stopped. She shot to her feet, a chair scraping harshly against the floor. What did you do? Hospital administration is so dreadfully bureaucratic. Penny mused, waving a dismissive hand. But a sizable anonymous donation to their new surgical wing, with a few suggestions about reallocating resources. It works wonders. Your mother's long-term care was deemed an inefficient use of a premium suite. Penny's smile was pure poison. They moved her out an hour ago, to a public ward in a city clinic. I'm not even sure which one. The world tilted. The fluorescent lights, The rain-streaked windows, Penny's victorious face, it all blurred into a vortex of raw panic. Emma shoved past her, ignoring the taunting laughter that followed her out of the office. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers trembling too hard to dial properly. The hospital's automated system was a nightmare of menus and holds. No one could give her a straight answer. She burst out of the building and into the torrential downpour, the cold shock of the rain doing nothing to quell the fire of terror in her chest. Her mother, defenseless, alone, shuffled around like an inconvenience because of this woman's hatred. Emma ran, her cheap flat slapping against the wet pavement, tears and rain mixing on her face. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to do something. A sleek, black Bentley sedan pulled silently to the curb beside her, its headlights cutting through the deluge. The passenger door swung open. Steve Chandler sat inside, his face etched with a grim concern that made the air in her lungs freeze. He must have been waiting. "Get in, Emma," he said, his voice a low command that brooked no argument. She stumbled into the plush leather interior, a mess of soaked fabric and shivering limbs. The door closed with a heavy, sound-dampening thud, sealing them in a cocoon of quiet luxury. He said nothing, simply wrapping his own tailored suit jacket around her shoulders. It was warm and smelled faintly of sandalwood and power. Only then did he see the faint, finger-shaped bruises on her arm from where Jason had grabbed her the day before, now stark against her pale, cold skin. His calm, detached demeanor dissolved. It wasn't a loud or dramatic shift, but it was terrifying. The warmth in his eyes was replaced by glacial fury, a stillness so absolute it felt like the pressure before a storm breaks. "Who did this?" he asked, his voice lethally soft. Emma couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She just shook her head, fear warring with a desperate, burgeoning trust. If she told him, what would he do? What would Penny and Jason do in retaliation? Her silence was its own answer. She didn't have to name them. She just had to let him see the wreckage they'd left behind. Steve's jaw tightened. He pulled out his phone, his thumb moving with swift, precise gestures. "Kill the Sterling Corp deal," he said into the phone, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "And I want a full spectrum audit of their board. Personal and professional. Everything." He paused, his cold gaze fixed on the rain-slicked street. "Contact Highland Hospital's chairman. Inform him his position is under review pending an investigation into patient care protocols. Effective immediately." He listened for a moment before continuing. "Find out where they sent her mother. Have my personal physician meet her there. Spare no expense." Another pause, and Jason Miller. "I want him to have a very public, very painful accident. Make sure he understands it's just the beginning." He ended the call and the silence in the car returned, heavier than before. A moment later, his phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it, his expression hardening further. His aid was efficient. "It was Penny," Steve stated, not as a question, but as a final confirmation. "She was at the hospital when they moved your mother. Jason was with her." Emma stared at him, the shivering finally subsiding as a different kind of tremor took its place. She had known Steve was wealthy, but this was something else entirely. This wasn't just money, it was command. With a few quiet words, he had set in motion a tidal wave of retribution aimed directly at the people who had tried to drown her. In the sterile quiet of his car, surrounded by the storm, she finally understood. She wasn't just carrying a rich man's child. She was under the protection of a king. The air in Lumiere and Co. was so hushed it felt sacred, each tick of a hidden clock a reverent whisper. Emma traced the cool edge of a velvet display case, her reflection a stranger in the diamond-filtered light. Around her, a world of impossible brilliance glittered, necklaces like frozen waterfalls, earrings like captured starlight. The entire flagship store, a monument to old money and new power on Fifth Avenue, had been closed to the public just for her. Steve's personal assistant, Clara, a woman of serene efficiency, stood a respectful distance away. Mr. Chandler insisted you choose something, she said softly. A gift, to celebrate. To celebrate what? Of a nightmare. The beginning of a dream she was still too afraid to fully inhabit. Emma's hand instinctively went to the gentle curve of her stomach. This baby, their miracle, was the anchor to this new reality. A reality where the man she'd spent one anonymous, desperate night with was not just a kind protector, but someone who could command the world to bend to his will. It's all a bit much, Emma confessed, her voice barely audible. You'll get used to it, Clara replied with a knowing smile. The heavy glass doors suddenly burst open, shattering the cathedral-like silence. Jason and Penny stormed in, their faces contorted with a familiar blend of arrogance and fury. Penny's heels clicked aggressively on the marble floor, a sound like cracking ice. There you are, Jason sneered, his eyes scanning the opulent room before landing on Emma with venomous disdain. Found yourself a new wallet already, and an expensive one, at that. Penny stalked forward, her gaze dropping to Emma's belly. Look at her, Jason, playing the pathetic, pregnant victim. I bet you're milking this for all it's worth. Who's the poor sap, Emma? Some old, rich fool you trapped. She leaned in, her voice a poisonous whisper. Or did you just get knocked up by the highest bidder? The store manager and two security guards hurried over, their faces pale with alarm. Sir, madam, this is a private appointment. You have to leave, Jason scoffed, buffing out his chest. Private? We're VIP clients here. I bought this little gold digger her engagement ring in this very store. He pointed a contemptuous finger at Emma. She doesn't belong here. We do. Emma flinched, to memory of that ring, of his false promises, a phantom ache in her heart. But the fear was different now. It was no longer for herself, but for the tiny life she carried. She took a step back, shielding her abdomen. Seeing the protective gesture, Penny's eyes lit with a cruel fire. She lunged, her manicured hand clawing for Emma's stomach. Let's see how your sugar daddy feels when you lose his precious meal ticket. Clara moved instantly, blocking Penny's path. The security guards grabbed Jason and Penny's arms, but they thrashed and shouted, turning the serene showroom into a tableau of raw, ugly chaos. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs, a cold dread washing over her. Then, the world went silent. Steve Chandler stood in the doorway. He hadn't made a sound, but his presence filled the room, sucking the very air from it. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his expression a mask of glacial calm that promised utter devastation. The temperature in the store seemed to drop 20 degrees. Jason froze mid-shout, his mouth hanging open. Penny's struggle ceased, her face draining of all color as recognition, and then sheer terror dawned in her eyes. The security guards, the manager, Clara, everyone stood motionless, their attention fixed on him. Steve's gaze swept over the scene, missing nothing. Emma's frightened posture, Penny's outstretched hand, Jason's slack-jawed shock. His eyes, cold and hard as steel, finally settled on the store manager. Mr. Laurent, Steve said, his voice quiet yet carrying the weight of absolute command. Explain, Mr. Laurent practically stumbled over himself, his professional composure shredded. Mr. Chandler, my deepest apologies. These people forced their way in. We were just removing them. Steve's eyes flicked to Jason and Penny, a look of such profound dismissal it was more insulting than any curse. I have never seen these people in my life, he stated simply. Ensure I never see them again. In any of my properties. He paused, letting the implication of my properties hang in the air, and revoked their so-called VIP status. Permanently, of course. Mr. Chandler. At once, Mr. Lawrence snapped his fingers, and the security guards, now galvanized, hauled a sputtering Jason and a suddenly mute Penny toward the door. "You can't do this," Jason finally managed, his voice cracking. "Do you know who I am?" Steve didn't even grant him a glance. "No," he said, his focus entirely on Emma, his expression softening as he walked toward her. "And you, clearly, have no idea who I am." As the doors closed on their pathetic protests, a profound quiet descended once more. Steve stopped in front of Emma, his hands gently taking hers. They were warm and steady, a stark contrast to her own trembling fingers. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and laced with concern. "Did she touch you?" Emma shook her head, a thousand questions swirling in her mind. She looked past his shoulder at the bowing, terrified manager. She thought of the hospital bills that had mysteriously vanished, the top-tier doctors who suddenly appeared at her mother's bedside. The way every obstacle in her path had simply dissolved over the past few weeks. It wasn't just a wealthy benefactor. This was something else entirely. "Steve," she whispered, her voice tight, "the manager called you Mr. Chandler, as in Chandler Holdings." A flicker of something regret for the deception perhaps crossed his face. Yes. Chandler Holdings wasn't just a company. It was an empire. A global behemoth in tech, real estate, and finance. And he was the man at its apex. The reclusive, sterile billionaire whispered about in financial journals, his face rarely seen. The man who was supposedly incapable of fathering a child. He led her to a plush velvet couch at the back of the store, waving away the fussing staff. They were alone now, in their own bubble amidst the glittering diamonds. "I didn't want to overwhelm you," he said, his gaze earnest. "My life, it can be a lot. I wanted you to know me first." "Not the name." "Overwhelm me," Emma gave a small, breathless laugh. "Steve, my ex-husband and his mistress just tried to attack me in a jewelry store you apparently own. I think we're past the point of being overwhelmed." She looked at him, truly looked at him, seeing the immense power coiled beneath his calm exterior. "All of it my mother's new doctors, the private suite Jason losing that big contract his company depended on, that was all you." He didn't flinch. "I told you I would protect you and our child. I meant it." He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a sleek leather portfolio, placing it on the small table between them. "This is for you, and for her." He gently placed a hand over hers on her stomach. Emma opened it. Inside were legal documents, thick and official. A deed to a penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, transfer of title for a significant stock portfolio in her name, and a trust fund established in the name of their unborn child. So vast the number of zeros made her head spin. It was a fortress built of paper and ink, an absolute guarantee of security that no one could ever breach. But more important was the final document, a single sheet from the nation's top neurological institute. It was a comprehensive care plan for her mother, detailing her transfer to their long-term facility, effective immediately. The prognosis, for the first time, was hopeful. Tears welled in Emma's eyes, hot and unrestrained. They weren't tears of fear or sadness, but of profound, bone-deep relief. The constant, knowing anxiety that had been her companion for so long finally, blessedly, released its grip. She was safe. Her mother was safe. Her baby was safe. She looked up at him, her vision blurry. "Why? Why?" He seemed taken aback by the question. He cupped her face, his thumbs gently wiping her tears away. "Because, Emma, you and this baby are the first things in a very long time that have made my life feel real. You walked into the darkness of my world and brought the light." The detached businessman, the powerful CEO, was gone. In his place was just a man, his heart bare in his eyes. He saw her not as a problem to be managed or a possession to be protected, but as his partner, his future. Emma leaned into his touch, finally letting the last of her walls crumble. She pressed her face into his chest, inhaling the clean, steady scent of him. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, a perfect circle of strength and devotion. "I thought I would have to fight them forever," she murmured against his suit. "You will never have to fight alone again," he promised, his voice a solemn vow against her hair. He tilted her chin up, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was not about passion, but about sealing a promise. It was a kiss of homecoming. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers, a genuine, breathtaking smile transforming his face. "Now," he whispered, his hand coming to rest on her belly, a gesture of pure, unadulterated joy. "How about we go home and decide which room will be the nursery?"